This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing stated on it, either by its hosts or any guests, is to be construed as psychological, medical, or legal advice. You are listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. I'm Haley Radke. Today, we are joined by Melissa Guida-Richards, author of What White Parents Should Know About Transracial Adoption, an adoptee's perspective on its history, nuances, and practices. Melissa is a late discovery adoptee, accidentally finding out at age 19. She shares with us how she's reconciled with her adoptive mother and how they now navigate open conversations about race and adoption. Melissa also tells us about how and why she decides to educate and engage with adoptive parents, both in print through her words and in online discussions. We wrap up with some recommended resources, and as always, links to everything we'll be talking about today are on the website adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I'm so pleased to welcome to Adoptees On, Melissa Guida-Richards. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Fellow podcaster. I always have this very soft spot in my heart for fellow podcasters. So anyway, we will get to that eventually. But first, would you mind sharing a little bit of your story with us?
I was adopted from Colombia about 5 months old by my immigrant Portuguese and Italian parents that live in the United States. As soon as they heard about me, they kind of already were like, oh yeah, I want her. There wasn't any back and forth really. I was their first option, and they immediately traveled to Colombia to come meet me. And it was this special moment for my parents. And then they kind of had to leave to finish the paperwork, and then they had to go back and forth. So that was this whole drawn out process for about 5 months until they finally were able to take me home. And I grew up in the suburbs of New York with my very, very Italian family. And for those of you who don't know, I'm also a late discovery adoptee, which means that I didn't find out that I was adopted until I was 19. So for most of my life, I just grew up in my white majority family, my white majority suburban area, and I didn't really know much about my heritage other than the fact that I was born in Colombia without really a reason as to why. And then now it's 9 years. It's been 9 years since I've found out, and I discovered my paperwork, and I kind of confronted my parents, and we had it out. Just to put it simply, it was a big shock. And I grew up, as I mentioned, in an immigrant family. They were very old-fashioned. They grew up in very small towns in Portugal and Italy. So they didn't really have much experience with diversity. And so they had very closed-minded views of people from other cultures. So when I found out that I was Latina and multiracial, it was a very confusing time because I didn't know what that meant. And for me, growing up with one identity of being the perfect little Italian daughter to now a Colombian adoptee, it was this huge switch about well, what does this mean? What is even a woman of color? Am I really a woman of color? I thought I was Italian. Now I don't know who I am. And it was this whole huge identity crisis for several years where I've been in and out of therapy trying to digest everything and come to terms with everything. And that's when I kind of delved into the world of the adoption community and reached out to fellow adoptees from Colombia on Facebook. And it was just that instant connection of, wow, these people get me. They understand what it means to be part of one culture and then not enough of another, and then just trying to figure out who we were. And so I used all of that to kind of inspire conversations with my parents, because I realized that, hey, even though we disagreed upon a lot, I still wanted a relationship with them. And despite my adoption being complicated, like many other adoptees, I felt there was something that we could do to make things better for future generations of adoptee. And so from many conversations with my parents from then on in the past few years, I was inspired to write a book, actually. So I wrote What White Parents Should Know About Transracial Adoption, and my mom ended up writing the foreword. And it was just a special project that I had hoped to bring the adoption community together and to work through more adoption things and learn more about the history for myself and for other adoptees to allow that experience and others in the adoption community to learn all this stuff. And I used parts of my story, and it was this healing journey for me and for my parents that allowed us to get much closer. And that's pretty much it.
Just in a nutshell. Thank you for sharing. I kind of want to go to something that you within a couple sentences kind of glossed over. But I remember when I heard your story as a late discovery adoptee for the first time and understood that you were out of contact with your parents for a full year before you came back to them and started having discussions. I was like, how? Why? I would have been so mad. I mean, I can't even picture it, right? So that's all the feeling I'm stuck in is the mad. And I understand that you lost your dad. So I'm sorry for your loss. So he passed last year?
About a year and a half ago now.
A year and a half ago. Okay. So I'm sorry for your loss. So I'm assuming that's why a part of your book that your mom, she wrote the intro, and he read any of your book?
He didn't read it, but he knew a lot from the discussions from what we had.
Right. So he's very represented through your words there. Yeah. So would you mind taking us back to that? And you said you did want a relationship with them, and so that was kind of the motivation. But how did you get past them keeping this secret?
Yeah, hell, it wasn't easy. I'm going to be honest with you. It definitely wasn't easy. When I first found out, I was 19. So I was many people like in that time frame, they're going through changes anyways, coming of age time, where a lot of us are in college. We're just trying to figure out who we are. And then for me, everything was kind of compounded with, whoa, like my whole life is like a little bit different and yet not, because I didn't even know where to get started, who to talk to really. And like now you can search transracial adoption and like things pop up on Instagram, TikTok, everywhere, you can find something. But back then it was a little harder, and all I could find out was from Facebook groups. And so my initial reaction was to kind of vent about it to my boyfriend at the time and to the Facebook group. And then immediately I was met with like the duality of like, well, oh my God, I can't believe that happened to you. But too bad, you should be grateful anyway. And so in that time period, I was just so confused and mad. And I didn't know how to handle it other than just fight with my parents. And I realized like, well, that's not really healthy. I'm in college right now. They had like counselors there. And I just took the time. Like for a year, I didn't talk to my mom at all. I talked to my dad every few weeks, but it was just like a check-in, like, hey, you're alive, you're okay. That's it. And like 2-minute phone calls, that was it. But we had completely kind of cut ourselves off, me and my boyfriend, because we were in college about 8 hours away from my family. So I didn't have to see them. We didn't go back for breaks. We didn't have to do any of that. So I was able to kind of concentrate on myself for the first time. And I started joining Latino Unidos groups on campus and just kind of diversifying my circle even more. And I had already like found myself already pulled towards a more diverse community. Even in high school and middle school, I just got along better with the other kids of color because they understood what it kind of meant. Because since I was a little girl, I was always perceived as Latina. And my response would be like, oh, sorry, I'm not. And so I had that kind of guilt of being like lying for my whole life, but I didn't know. I didn't know any better. And so for a year, I talked to the counselor, and as you can imagine, like college counselors are like vastly unprepared for something like that. And
I feel like that's like an understatement.
yeah, so like their immediate response was like, well, cut them off, don't talk to them at all. But for those who know me, like I grew up in this very like family oriented environment where my parents always told me like where you come from matters, who your parents are matters. I was so proud of like my culture of being Italian and Portuguese. My parents coming to America with nothing on their backs and working from being like a dishwasher and sweeping the floor in the kitchens to now owning the stereotypical house with a white picket fence. And I was taught from a young age to have that like kind of Catholic guilt too. So that was definitely a little bit of the motivation where I was, they did mess up, but they're my parents. At the end of the day, like my mom's the one who wiped my butt. My parents took care of me. They raised me. And no matter what happened, I knew deep down in my heart that the choices that they made wasn't from a place of evil. It was more out of a place of ignorance. And I knew that like my dad, he could barely read. He struggled because when he came here, they didn't really have ESL classes, and they couldn't really teach him English well at the high school, so he dropped out. My mom, luckily, she was very smart, and she was able to like catch up and learn a bunch of languages and everything. But with certain things, they weren't very informed, and one of that was diversity and prejudices, and they were just surrounded by the same type of people who kind of influence those stereotypes that they were used to, and they didn't know any better. And that's not to say like their ignorance is to be something just to brush off. My parents had to do a lot of work to get to the place where we could be in a healthy relationship. And it wasn't easy. I had to sit myself down and be realistic about like what I expected from my relationship with my parents and what they expected from theirs. And for some things, I had to compromise, and for others, I couldn't. And after I did more and more therapy with actual qualified therapists after college, I was able to kind of put words to like what was okay, what was healing for me. And for me, it was just like the type of language and the type of jokes. I had like a no nonsense kind of policy, especially now having kids. And my kids are multiracial like me. My husband's half Colombian. So we're a very like diverse family. And I wanted to make sure that my kids had a healthy environment growing up and they never second guessed the way they looked or their identity as well. So I had to be really strict with my parents and have very blunt conversations. And it was hard. It was very hard at first, but over time, the conversations got a little bit easier, and we realized that our love for each other was enough to kind of make the work and the emotions and all of that worth it.
Thank you for sharing that in detail, because I think, some of us just don't even know what that process could look like. And I know that there's so many of us that struggle in relationships anyway and struggle with boundaries and all of those things. So it's interesting to hear from you, as a young woman putting up rules and specific boundaries about, okay, we're not taking those kind of jokes and like all of those kinds of things. It's almost like you're becoming a parental figure in teaching them some of those. Did you ever feel like that? You're like, am I the grown up here? What is going on?
I definitely did. And it's funny because like growing up in an immigrant family, like a European immigrant family, a lot of the similarities were to like my husband's side, who grew up with like his mom who was from Colombia. So even though I wasn't raised Colombian, we had a lot of similar types of things with like old fashioned beliefs and stuff. And then anybody who's in an immigrant family and first generation family, they kind of get it. There are people in your family who are set in their ways, and some people are not going to change, but some people are willing to change. It just takes a lot of work. And at some point you just kind of have to laugh at how ridiculous it is, because it is kind of like reparenting. It's like intergenerational trauma and like things that these types of families go through that you have to work through and be willing to break out of these endless cycles that can be so painful. But the important thing is that everybody has to be willing to do work. Everybody has to be respectful of one another. And of course, everyone's going to make mistakes at some point, but if they are willing to do the work and you are too, you can get really far and you can strengthen those relationships and change things. So for other kids in the family, like cousins and nephews or whatever, they won't have to go through like what you did.
I'm starting to get why you are able to do what you do. So,
what do you mean?
Okay, let me unpack that. So you wrote a book for white adoptive parents. You consistently educate adoptive parents on your social media channels and engage with them and answer questions. And I have drawn a firm line that I am not here for that. I do adult adoptee stuff. And in fact, I think it was maybe, I don't know, let's say 8 months ago, where I was like, I have a new rule here. If you are an adoptive parent and you comment, I'm not replying to you because I don't have time for that. Because I could not with the nonsense anymore. And for me personally, it was so energy draining. It was so frustrating. And I was like, I'm here to serve adult adoptees, and that's kind of it. So tell me about that choice to, you've hinted at it a little bit. You've said a couple things here and there. You've left us some crumbs already, but about why you're doing that specifically for change, of course, and how you do it. Because there's a lot of us listening that are like, yeah, we're not here for that. We're not meaning not that that work's not important and we shouldn't do it. It's just like, we can't do that.
Yeah. I mean, it is emotionally taxing, but for me, just looking at the power structure in the adoption community, I had to have like very blunt conversations with myself and even with my parents about who has the power here and why. And to me, the adoptive parents and the adoption industry, they have the power because they have the money. And adoptive parents, especially, they're the ones doing fundraisers, or they're just bringing it in because they make that much money and they're investing. And then so the adoption agencies and people are going to listen to them. They're going to cater to what adoptive parents want. And then it's usually like how fast people can get an adoption through, what type of baby, and then they have the cost of everything. But when it comes down to it, I want to make lasting change. And I want to turn the adoption industry on a whole new level where we aren't having these ethical issues and we are working in tandem with one another to make progress and not go backwards in any way. And to do that, I firmly believe that we have to work together. And I understand not everybody has the emotional wavelength to do this work. But for me, I felt educating adoptive parents, especially white adoptive parents for transracial adoptees, is so important because of the numbers. 70% of adoptive parents are white. And like most adopted kids are kids of color. And then we look at these things and we look at the programs that are involved. And if we can get adoptive parents on the same page, we can make some serious changes that will help end child trafficking, help end all these terrible things that are going on in this industry. And of course, it's not like this one-stop thing where everything's going to be perfect just from like writing a book, but it's a step in the right direction. And I found that word of mouth and like reaching out to one person, helping one adoptive family, they talk to another adoptive family, and then they talk to another, and then people all of a sudden are sitting there and they're willing to listen to our experiences. They're willing to realize like, hey, when I was deciding to adopt, like I never even thought of this. And that in itself is not okay. We need to make changes. And all of a sudden, those are adoptive parents that are going to teach and raise adoptees in a completely different way that is so much more healing than it was for our generation.
Thank you for including me in your generation. Okay, I get that desire to make things different for the next generation. I absolutely do. And I love seeing, you probably see this too. There's so many more younger adult adoptees who are doing mentorship and things like that for younger adopted people, kids, which is just like amazing and wonderful. What I would have given, to have someone speak into my life, I think my perspective on things would have shifted much sooner, and it would have been a lot more healing for me as well. But how do you deal, Melissa? Because you kind of were like, oh, you say the hard things and then they hear you and they're changing. But I think from what I've seen in your comments, what I've seen online when other adoptees are speaking up and challenging the stereotypes around adoption, what I see from most adoptive parents is, gross. This isn't true for my kid. Only worse, worded worse than that. So how do you deal with that nasty pushback?
When it first happened, I really got a taste of it when I wrote my original HuffPo article about being a late discovery adoptee and finding I was adopted. And just in that one experience of saying hey, I didn't find out until I was an adult. My parents didn't tell me, and now I'm struggling with my identity.
Is it this one? My adoptive parents hid my racial identity from me for 19 years.
Yes.
And then just underneath, my parents successfully passed me off as a dark-skinned Italian for 19 years of my life. And I have the date on this as from 2019, early in 2019. Okay, so you posted that. It went pretty viral, right?
Yeah, it went all over the world. There was translations everywhere. And I got hundreds of emails, mostly from adoptive parents, or even just people who knew adoptees that didn't even have a personal stake in it with other family members. And I was just kind of taken aback. I'm whoa, this is a lot of anger for a random person on the internet. And they were super protective of my adoptive parents. How could you do this to them? How could you share their story and whatever? And I'm not that it matters, but I talked to my parents beforehand and they're fine with it. So let's step back a little bit there. But it was just kind of amusing to me. It's just the anger that people had. It was just instinctive almost to just fight and protect and try to cling to this, adoption is perfect narrative. And that's when I really had my first taste of the toxic positivity in the adoption community. I realized this really contributes to a lot of the issues because we hold adoption on this very high pedestal where we don't want anything or anybody to touch it. But if we don't settle down and actually look at it without the rose-colored glasses and see the flaws, see the issues with it, we can't improve it. And we're just letting things fall through the cracks. We're letting people fall through the cracks. And so as my mom would say, it's just I can be brutally honest sometimes. And I try to bring that part of me into my work, on my adoption page on Instagram and just in my essays I write. I really try not to shy away from the facts. And I use a lot of research-based arguments in it. And I try to back it with facts and news stories of actual events and my personal experience as an adoptee. So adoptive parents will see hey, she has this opinion, but it's backed by this. So they'll kind of give it a little bit more weight than someone as in their eyes, because I try to put myself in their eyes and see oh, they're just complaining. No, this is actually a real situation we need to look at. So when other people come into my comments, they're oh, you're silly, you're ungrateful, yada, 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 expletives that we can't say. I kind of just block immediately. I've learned it to be second nature. It's if you're acting like this, I already know that you're not the type of person to listen to an actual educational argument that will get somewhere. And so if you're going to come on my page with hate, then that's an immediate block. But if you're going to come in my comments and like have a legitimate question and really want to do the work and really want to understand, then I'll be open to some discussion. And like I make it sure that like my DMs are open so we can have these conversations, and I make sure that people can comment on these posts and they can talk to one another. But I make sure that I put the adoptees first. So if anyone's making any nasty comments towards me or towards other adoptees that commented, I don't even try to argue with them. I just block them because I don't want that type of negativity on my page. But otherwise, I am very open to furthering this education. And I feel like the best way we can do that is to allow questions, because nobody's just going to know everything about the adoption industry without being educated in different ways. And we have that through your podcast, through other people's podcasts and books and pages and essays. And so we have these endless opportunities to kind of take things to a next level that make dealing with the nonsense a little easier for me.
How do you know when it's time to stop? Because you are like, my DMs are open and comments, like I can reply back. There's not enough hours in the day for that. So how do you personally take care of yourself and knowing when to stop? And also, there's a lot of people listening that want to create content and want to share their story in various ways. And I think it's exciting to think of something going viral, but it's also very scary. So I was looking through some of your reels on Instagram, and, some of them have over 100,000 views. I deleted TikTok a long time ago because I have an addictive personality and I just can't have it on my phone. So I wasn't able to check those numbers. But how do you know when you're like, I need to turn off comments on this or whatever settings to protect yourself from the really hard vitriol kind of stuff?
I have on iPhone, you can like set how long you want to use a particular app. And so I have like Instagram set for like an hour and a half, and like TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter like an hour. So like I make sure I get that time, because for those of you who are interested in becoming a writer or like writing essays or books or whatever, you're going to have to be on social media in some regard, especially for nonfiction. So for me, I try to be a little bit every day and to interact with adoptees and see like the beautiful like creative posts that are out there, because it's always very inspiring. And then also to go through like my posts and make sure I'm answering as many as I feel willing to. And so like I'll check them as they come in, but my routine is I don't create content based on like a calendar. It's more about what feels right in the moment for me. And if I'm really passionate about a topic, I'll make a video or I'll like do a Twitter rant. And then I usually just like post it. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to let that sit. I'll come check on that later. And then when I feel like it, I go back, I see what's going on. And then I kind of interact based on like what I feel in that moment. So I don't feel obligated to be like, okay, I'm going to answer every single message. It's more like I have a pretty good understanding of my capabilities and my mental health, where I can be like, I can handle talking to people right now. And now I don't. Another day it might be different. I may be able to do more one day and one not. Well, it's important is that like I listen to that voice in my head so I don't overdo it, because like once you reach that point, you can spiral, and it can really, really take a toll on your mental health, especially with social media, comparing yourself to everybody. So I just try to keep track of it. And then if one day I'm doing more than the other, I get that little notification on my phone. I'm like, okay, I'll give myself 15 more minutes if I want to do that. And then that's it, because I can't do that all day long. Otherwise, you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Appreciate that, because because I think it is really hard for us to disengage. And I used to be extremely sensitive to negative comments. And so this may sound counterintuitive, but I'm thankful for the slow build of my podcast, because now when people say nasty things to me, I'm like, well, sucks to be you. I got thousands of people telling me otherwise, so I'm good, you know, especially for our tiny little baby creators. We want to give them good skills now to lift them up because we want more adoptee stuff in the world. You have done so much writing on the topic, and I love that you keep your finger on the pulse because you're always writing like the timely article about whatever the adoption topic of the day is, which is awesome. I love that. Oh my gosh, I'm like, oh, Melissa has another byline here and here. It's been really fun to watch your success in freelance publishing. So congratulations on those. That's huge. It's a big deal.
Thank you.
But let's talk about your book a little bit. I got a copy, like I pre-ordered, so it came to my house as soon as it released. And then I had started it and I was like, oh, you know what? I really want to order this for extended family member who has adopted. And so I got them a copy before I had even finished reading it. I gave it to them before I had finished reading your book. And then as I was reading your book, I was like, wow, this is a little spicier than I had anticipated. And I've already gifted the book to extended family members, again, who I have promised to mind my own business in that because, as you know, I have lots of opinions on adoption. So let's talk about how you decided to just tell it like it is in your book. You mentioned a little bit earlier that that's how you choose to write and how you choose to show up in the world. But even the title, What White Parents Should Know About Transracial Adoption, an adoptee's perspective on its history, nuances, and practices. Lots of the things I have marked, I absolutely agree with. I have very strong feelings about, I'm pro-family preservation, and I don't take for any of this adoption industry nonsense, and hard agree. But there's a lot of things in here that I would characterize as spicy. So thoughts on that?
Well, Haley, I have to say that the title used to be spicier. Not
Okay.
a lot of people know that, but
I did know that. I did know that. I just didn't know if that was public. So if you want to say what it used to be.
Oh yeah. It was on like the publisher's announcement originally, but then we changed it. It was originally the white savior mentality, and so yeah. So when I originally pitched this book to my publisher, we had like very open conversations where it was originally supposed to be kind of like a guidebook, a workbook type of thing. And then I had this like epiphany one night after a very heated conversation with my parents. And I was like, you know what? I think things would be different if someone had sat down my parents and had a really honest conversation with them. Because I feel like a lot of times adoption agencies and like the industry doesn't give adoptive parents enough credit for what they can handle. And we kind of like tiptoe around like what they'll be comfortable with. And I was like, you know what? I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. And I told that to my publisher from the beginning. It's like, I am not going to shy away from topics. I'm going to talk about racism. I'm going to talk about microaggressions. I'm going to talk about prejudices and like the cost analysis and everything in adoption. And I really want to get into it because if we're going to do this, I wanted to do it right. And so I had my outline about like what certain topics I wanted to cover. And then as I got into it, like, let me tell you, I had stacks of like peer review articles, research done by like psychologists and news sources and everything, because I wanted to make sure that we had everything that I could possibly include in one book that would make changes. And so I kind of curated it like that. And I would try to be, for those of you who haven't read the book or just starting it, like I tried to tell a little bit of my story and then let's get into the history. Let's get into these facts. And then like, why are we talking about that? And then how can we really apply this to our adoptive families, whether you're an adoptive parent or adoptee? And I think at the end of the day, I'm very happy with how it turned out. And honestly, I am surprised by how well it's been received.
Say more about that. Because when I was going to ask, because often I'll go on Goodreads and like check and see what people are saying. I didn't do that this time. I wasn't sure. So I haven't checked, but I guess when I'm characterizing it as spicy, all I have in my head is I gifted this book to close family members who have not been interested necessarily in what I'm doing because it probably puts up a mirror that isn't comfortable right now. And hopefully it will be at some point. But this is not a direct quote, but like I could imagine it being, something you might say. It's literally like, I don't care if this hurts your feelings. I'm just telling you all the wrong things about what you've participated in here. So I don't know. I don't know what the feedback has been or if people who buy the book already are like, okay, I kind of know what I'm getting into here. So what has that been like?
I mean, for people who like know me through like my Instagram and my podcast, Adoptee Thoughts, they already kind of like know me enough to be like, okay, her book isn't going to like hold my hand. And then I made sure to have like an introduction section where I lay it all out. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to cover these topics. You are going to be feeling uncomfortable and you might feel some type of way. You might get heated. You might get angry. And that's okay. Take a step back. You don't have to read this all in one sitting. But you have to realize that it's going to be hard. And in order to make progress and to work on yourself and to do best for your family, you have to talk about these tough topics. And you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable because one day your child's going to come home and they are going to experience racism. That's just a fact. And, that person that may have done that to their child may be your uncle. Maybe, grandma, beloved grandma. And you have to be willing to do what's best for the child, not what's most comfortable for you. And so I make sure from right after my mom's forward to lay it all out there. And I tried to kind of sugarcoat that with my mom's forward into the book because I wanted people to see that, hey, I'm not just taking this from a place like, I hate adoptive parents, blah, 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 you should feel bad about yourselves. Like, I wanted them to see, like, hey, no, like, I'm talking from a place where, like, I had these open conversations. I had these frank things with my parents. And that's why me and my mom are so close right now. It's because we did not shy away from these things. And, we don't agree on every single point, but we understand each other now and we respect one another. And she understands racism in a much more clear way than she ever was because, to be frank, a lot of white people don't have these conversations because they don't have to. But that's kind of how I did it. And so far it's been pretty well received. Like on Goodreads, I think it has like a 4.5, and then on like Amazon it has like a 4.7. And like the biggest complaint I got is just like random 2 stars that would be like, I was expecting more. I'm like, okay, Bob, I don't even know you, but thanks. But if that's the biggest complaint I got, then I think I'm doing all right.
Like expecting more pages? What like
I don't know.
Oh, yes, people. Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, I think it does lay out right at the front, like what you're going to get, when you read it. So I'm sure it will make a difference for a lot of adoptive families. I'm sure it's not going to be a surprise that will be the thing I recommend to folks. And also you mentioned you have your podcast, Adoptee Thoughts. And so you share a little more of your story on there in the first couple of episodes, and you have some interviews on there with other adoptees as well. But it's really exciting. The audiobook is available now for What White Parents Should Know About Transracial Adoption. Of course, so many of us that listen to podcasts love that an audiobook is available. It's great. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that your book got a starred review from Publishers Weekly, which is a really big deal. And not many books get that, to have that acknowledgement as well from someone completely outside of adoption.
Mm-hmm.
That's from the book world, is a really high compliment.
Yeah, when I saw that, I immediately printed it out. I was just like, Mom, look what we did. And so it's been amazing to see like what's come of my work and like literally like 2 years of my life just like research and like the emotional toll of writing something like this, and just to see like reviews like that just makes me feel like I really did something and that this is special and everything's coming together. And luckily like I'm able to have some amazing conversations with people like you and other adoptees doing such amazing work that it's been a really special time.
Well, I'm so glad that there are people like you who are willing to have the conversations with adoptive parents that someone like me is just not tasked to do. Not strong enough, not not able enough. And we had this whole series on estrangement over the last year or so, and talking about all of the really challenging things that have led adoptees to estrange from their adoptive parents. And so to hear a story like yours where you worked really hard to actually have those very hard conversations, and what came out of that it's really a beautiful thing. And it's a great example for folks that are like, I don't think estrangement is right for me. I think I do want to work at it. It is possible if your parents are willing and safe and ready to do that work. So I appreciate that you sharing a little more of that with us as well. So absolutely grab Melissa's book, and you can also buy it for the spicy takes and send it. Okay, wait, before you tell us what you're recommending, I just want to say I laughed out loud when I saw you offered to send this book anonymously. You could order it from Melissa and she would send it anonymously to someone for you. Sorry, it's still tickles me. Has anyone taken you up on that? Don't out them. I just want to know.
I'll just say that I've got several messages from adoptees that were like, I really want to send this to my parents, but I don't want to start like a fight or whatever. So that's where I got the idea from, because I was getting messages like that like pretty frequently. So I decided to offer it because I have a stack of books at home. So if anybody wants to send it anonymously, I will do that for you.
Okay. Give us one tip on how to start the conversation. If we're so desperate to have the conversation, we're willing to send a book anonymously. Give us one tip that you could tell another adult adoptee who really, probably transracial, who really wants to start maybe a conversation just about like, listen, I experienced adoption differently than you.
Yeah. Okay. So I still do this with my mom today. So if there's like a news article or something, like let's say the Pope just recently said that more people should adopt kids instead of animals. And so, immediately like you and me are already rolling our eyes. But I know my mom, who is Catholic, would be like completely different viewpoint. So I try to use like situations where the news story isn't very personal to my situation that can just open up the dialogue. So it's like, hey mom, what do you think about this? So you can get used to like sharing differing opinions without having such an instinctive like defensive response from both sides. And that's just like a great way to get the ball rolling and get you better or ready to have these tougher topics that are much more intimate. And so I suggest doing that like until you get comfortable with this kind of arguing with your parents or your loved ones in a healthy way, because you can have conversations in a healthy way if you just,
I like that. I like that. It's like starting on the external, the far out circle of topics and just bringing it closer and closer as safety permits. And some of us keep that circle a little out farther. You can't see my hand because it's audio, but you get it. You get it. Okay. Thank you. What do you want to recommend to us today, Melissa?
One of my favorite things is Adoption Mosaic work they do. They're run by Astrid, and she does these workshops with adoptees, and they have different topics like every single month. And they're super affordable and great for adoptees who want to learn more about other adoptees' experiences and just to see, like, oh, wow, you're not alone. And let's talk about estrangement. Let's talk about birth parents and searching and not searching and LGBTQ plus and all that stuff. And so it's in this very healthy environment, and she allows like the speakers to make sure they're comfortable and to chat afterwards. And I just thought it was like this really beautiful thing that really can benefit anybody in the adoption community.
Oh, that's a great recommendation. I had Astrid on the show on episode 156, and you also interviewed her on your show, and she talks a little bit more about these if you're curious. And I think on their website, you can go back and purchase conversations that have already happened and are recorded. So to whatever topic, you're interested in. Yes, I think she runs the panels, like you said, like very ethically, and it's not an exploitation of adoptee stories. Instead, it is all very curated, and they are supported when they're sharing about whatever the topic is. Great recommendation. I will definitely second that. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us, and for your work on the book and all the effort and labor you put on your social media channels. Which, speaking of, where can we connect with you online and find your book?
You can just connect with me at adopteethoughts.com. All my socials are linked there, and my book is available from any bookstore online. I definitely suggest your local indie, but anywhere you get it is great. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's definitely been like my bucket list goal to be on your podcast. And when I got the invite, I like screamed at my husband. I was like, my favorite adoption podcast. Like, yes, I'm gonna be on it.
Oh, I love that. I'm so grateful for other adoptees in the space doing the work. So when we can connect and like just do a real chat, it just fills me up. So thank you. Honored to work alongside of you in adoption land. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I am so thankful for your advocacy work. I hope you guys check out Melissa's podcast, Adoptee Thoughts, and her book. I bet you know someone you could gift it to if you're not an adoptive parent yourself. And as an adopted person, there's a lot you can learn about yourself, even when reading a book like this. So again, highly recommend Melissa's book too. I wanted to talk quickly about another book we are doing for our book club this month. So we have a Adoptees Only book club for Patreon supporters. If you go to adopteeson.com/book club, you can see all our book club picks for 2022. And so even if you're not a Patreon supporter, feel free to read along with us. We love supporting adoptee authors. And one way you can do that is by reading their books, leaving them a good review on Goodreads or Amazon or wherever else. Where else do you leave book reviews? I don't know. On the internet. I'm sure there's other spots you can do that. You can also request adoptee authored books for your local library, and often they will pick up library patron suggestions. So that's another free way you can access these books we're talking about. So for February 2022, our book is called American Bastard by Jan Beatty, and she is actually joining us at the end of the month for a live book club discussion, and the audio of that will be dropped into our Patreon's podcast feed right after that. So if you're a patron, please join us live, or if you're not able to make the live, don't worry, you can listen to it later. We'd love to have you join us for that. Adopteeson.com/book club has all the information about book club and all the picks for the year. And adopteeson.com/community has the ways you can partner with the show to help us keep going, to help me pay the Adoptees On bills and pay our editor and web hosting and the other folks that work on the show. So thank you so much for your support in that. Appreciate you helping us keep the lights on. So come and read with us. We'd love to discuss American Bastard with you this month. I find it a very interesting book because Jan is a poet. And so they kind of go back and forth between some poems and memoir vignettes. It's a very different style of book than I've seen before. It's very unique and captivating, and I think you probably will enjoy it. Would love to have you join us and read along with us. Thank you so much for listening. Let's talk again next Friday.